And it's not about anger or anger management or anger control. We know men are great at controlling their anger and managing their anger because they don't hit their bosses. You know, they hit people who are weaker and vulnerable than them. So it's not about anger control and anger management. It's about how do we look at issues of power institutionally and interpersonally in ways that make certain groups vulnerable. I want to come back to this chart and begin to talk about what does it mean to be an ally, and particularly what does it mean as a man to be an ally to women in ending male violence. People on this side of the chart have always come together for power, for the vote, for education, for jobs, for resources. I know there are thousands of examples in New Zealand history of people coming together for power and change. And I know that that's going on today all over the country. How come we can't just roll off 100, 200, 300 examples of that? Well, who writes our textbooks and gives us the news? People on this side or people on this side? Clearly, people on this side of the chart. So one of the things we have to talk about, what is the history, and particularly, what's the history of people on this side of the chart coming together? And then in all of those struggles, there's been people on this side of the chart who have been allies to people on this side of the chart. And I'm going to use some US examples because they're more familiar to me, but for instance, in the abolition movement, there were white people who stood up for abolition. And during the civil rights movement, there were white people who worked alongside African Americans for the end of segregation. The women's suffrage movement, there were men who stood out and worked with women in those struggles. So we have a long history of people from this side of the chart being allies to people on that side of the chart. But it's not an easy relationship. For instance, for me as a man, my basic education around women was that they were not very smart, they were too emotional, and that men had done everything of importance of the world, and therefore we should be in charge of making decisions. That was, you know, in a nutshell, that was my basic education around women. Well, that's not good ally material. If I walk into the room and say, here I am, I'm an ally, and I'm carrying all of that stuff, then I'm not going to get very far in being helpful in the struggle. So part of my challenge is to unlearn some of that stuff. Now, it's also not easy for you, those of you who are women, to trust me to be a good ally. Just because I walk in the room and say I'm an ally doesn't mean that you can trust that I'm going to actually be useful in some way. Because you've had a lot of experience with men, right? And some of it's maybe been good, some of it's been bad, some of it's probably been horrible. And you don't know who I am. So the relationship of an ally is, first of all, it's not what we say, it's what we do. And it's what we do over time. It's building a relationship so that trust comes out of, if it comes, out of the work we do together over time. So that means that this isn't just a natural, relationship. It's something that takes a lot of intense work. And I want to just say a few things about that. Which is, one of the things is that because I'm a man and I'm inside the male culture of power, it's hard for me to see how sexism works. I walk into a room, I'm treated respectfully, I'm listened to, I look up on the wall and there's pictures of men like me, I look on the shelves, there's books by men like me, it's just comfortable. I don't notice that a woman right beside me who walks in the same room gets to the door and goes, wait a second, this isn't safe here. Here we go again, I'm going to have to hunker down and learn what to do and find a strategy to survive, and she's not treated as well, or she's not listened to, or she's not safe there. So if I'm a male, I've got to get much better at seeing the culture of power, but even if I get really good at it, who's going to have the most insight into the male culture of power? It's going to be women, isn't it? So I need the leadership of women to really inform me about what is really going on. What is the culture of power? How is it operating? How are women being impacted by it? Now, that doesn't mean that I can then just turn to women around me and expect them to educate me, That's work that I need to do myself. And women have written lots, and there's lots of movies and books and poetry and music and all kinds of things by women, and I can get a really good education by that. I can also talk to other men, and so it's not about, I have to take responsibility for my education around the culture of power, but I need to be listening to women and women's leadership. So that's one key piece of being an ally. And the same thing is true for any of these lines on the chart. Whether it's Pākehā Maori struggles or the straight LGBT relationship or any of these. So that the leadership needs to come from the people who are most on the front lines. And the other reason that's true is because if I mess up, who's going to pay the consequences? Probably not me, because I've got the resources to figure out how not to avoid that, but it's going to come down on women. So if I'm doing trainings or work with men who are violent or public education, and I make mistakes, probably there are particular women who are going to suffer from that. And so I need to be accountable. I need to figure out systems of accountability around that. Okay, so that being said, I want to talk about 4 levels of men's work that, as I've come to kind of look at it. So that just when I talk about inviting men into doing this work, it's into doing 4 different levels of this work. The first level is the work on ourselves. It's the looking at our own behavior, our own education, our own practices, how we are around other people, controlling, abusive, expectations, male entitlement, male privilege. It's doing that kind of work. And that's a lifelong process. The second is with other men. We know men who are abusive. We know men who are controlling and dominating. We sit in meetings where men take over. We have relatives and family members who are abusive to their partners or to their children. Part of our responsibility, part of men's work, is challenging other men. And that's not, by that I don't mean from a self-righteous place. I mean from a loving place, from an understanding that they're coming from where we're coming from, and they've been trained the same way we were, and they came into the world with that heart that was open and good and curious and loving. But that what they're doing is unacceptable. And our responsibility as men is to reach out to those men and say, you cannot do that. The third level of men's work is with our sons. And by here, when I say sons, I mean all of the young men in our community. I don't mean our biological children. I mean all the boys around us. We need to be the role models. We need to be the ones bringing up these issues. We need to be the ones, and very often as men we don't know or notice a lot of the younger men and boys who look up at us. You know, the kids on the block, the cousins, the nephews, the kids in the classroom if we're teachers. There's lots, all of the time boys are looking at us for what it means to be men. And we have a responsibility to be models of a different kind of way of being in the world that's not violent. And so that's a practice, that's a mindfulness around being all of the time in our communities. And the fourth level of men's work is the public policy, the advocacy, the education, prevention, the public standing with women to end male violence. It comes back to that second question, who do you stand with? The ways that we stand publicly, whether it's in terms of working on public policy issues, advocating for women's resources and support, doing the education in the community with young people, that this is a really key level of men's work. It's not just a personal process. It's not just an interpersonal process. It's coming back to those 3 levels. It's an institutional process of working for the end of male violence.